Welcome to the Future Media Concept sponsored webinars. This webinar is covering DaVinci Resolve 17.3.2. Let's jump into it right away. When you open up the DaVinci Resolve, you have multiple ways of doing it. The one that is the simplest is activating the application. I'm working on a Macintosh, so left double click on the dock should open it up, and it registers that I have the Studio 17 version. By definition, when you open up a DaVinci Resolve from the get-go, there is going to be an untitled project showing up as a default project. In order to find out what the characteristics of that project are, I would recommend you right-click and you go into the project settings. The reason why one would do this, you need to find out what is the frame rate, aspect ratio, and all the elements that you need specifically when you're dealing with color management. But essentially the master settings is where you define what is the frame rate and the aspect ratio, raster size. There are a whole variety of choices that you can make, all the way up to like 8192 4320. In my case, it is important for me to know that I'm running in 24 frame as opposed to in broadcast. You have all these other options and you can pick and choose any of these formats. Generally, if you're working in United States, you would be for broadcast prepare 2997. Anything else is either specifically for film, which is 24, or if you're doing it for Vimeo, YouTube, or any of these social environments, they may have specific requirements what the frame rate is. I would probably think that the best scenario for you is try to match it what the camera frame rate is. In any case, let's move along and we're going to save that and it opens up. Double clicking the untitled project, it opens it up and it gives you a whole variety of workspaces. The first one is clearly the media, and that's where you bring in material to link. Cut is your very, very powerful but simple way of manipulating things. If you have an experience with Adobe Premiere or Avid or Final Cut Pro, the edit environment will be close to what you're experienced with. Upper left-hand corner would be the source monitor. The right-hand side would be the program monitor. Source player, record player, any of those terminologies apply. And the middle is the timeline. Fusion is a environment that you create animations. Color, we're going to spend some time with it. And Fairlight is the sound, and Deliver is the output. So let's go back quickly to the media. Right click in the environment, go in the middle. Import media puts me into the browser environment, and in the browser environment I am finding some material that I prepped, and the one I'm looking for is in the 17. There is a subfolder titled media. In the media I have Citizen Chain and I have a variety of QuickTime movies. I'm going to select all of them, switch over to edit. Might be a good idea to open up the media pool and edit so we see the imagery that we are going to be working with. And there are three different views: the text view, also known as the list view. Then we have the thumbnail view, and the thumbnail view is adjustable with a slider, make it bigger or smaller. And the one that is very popular, it's a new metadata view that is a combination of imagery and metadata that comes with it. For logistics and for simplicity, I'm going to use the list view, and I'm going to organize my material in either start time code or end time code or duration. So if I left click on the clip name, it organizes material in ascending. If I do it one more time, it's descending. So depending on how you set it up, you can actually organize your material. If you are a visual editor, you can switch over to the picture view, and by single clicking on any of those clips, you can define that that's going to be the first one. If you hold down shift and you go down to the line, the 4 shots that are in that line are going to be picked up. If you go further down, it picks up everything else. If you want to have individual sequence where you start the first shot holding down Command on the Mac and you select the shots non-consecutively, so that is the way that they're going to come in the story. And two different ways of putting a story together. One, click and drag, dragging all those clips into the timeline, one option. And a new sequence is created called timeline. The second option is going to be, let's delete that timeline. Not that we don't need it, but let's just get rid of it. Here's how the Resolve people deal with that. If they hit the delete button, it actually deletes it and it is undoable. So if you do the Command Z or the edit drop down, it should actually go back. So that's a very safe way of getting rid of stuff. In this case, I'm going to getting rid of that one more time. It asks me, do I want to delete that? And the second way of putting the story together is much more logical to me. Right click, create a new timeline using the selected clips. The only difference with this one is it is going to ask you how do you want to name that timeline. And I'm going to call it story number 1. So when I call it story number 1, I expect that I have put together a sequence of shots. Let's go out to media pool. And in order for me to see the entire sequence, Shift Z should show me all of them. You can zoom into your timeline with your Command plus, and Command minus zooms it out. If you want to see pictures, and some people like to see the pictures, I warn you that is RAM intensive. Go into upper left hand corner of the timeline, open up the timeline view options and switch it to the stacked timeline. Now you can see the story tab in the timeline. Go back to the icon that represents that timeline view option, and this is where you can define that you're going to see things in film strip view. Very, very cool, and it's very powerful, and a lot of people like it. I am again warning that it is very RAM intensive, so you see the pictures in the record monitor as well. You see the pictures in the timeline. The height of the track is very easy adjustable. Just drag it up or down. Very practical for some users. Maybe the second option is better, so the first and the last frame is the one you see. So if you zoom in, you can see the first and last frame of the shot. And the third option is when you have many tracks to work with. A lot of users switch over to the view that is the regular line view. And in that case, the height of the track is still adjustable. If you want to bring back the picture, you can go back into the area and tell the computer, please show me everything. And nothing shows up, even though you selected to show the film strip. The reason being, the track is not tall enough. There we go, it kicks in at one point. Quick editing shortcuts that I would just introduce, throw at you. You understand the concept of mark in, mark out, I, O. And if I look at the keyboard settings, which is Command Option K, the keyboard tells me what are the possible scenarios, and the default is the one I'm using. Point your attention to the backspace and the delete. On my keyboard, both of those buttons have the delete written on them. Therefore, if I use that understanding that I have a large delete, I come up with the lift, Command Z undo. If I do the small delete, extract. That's the first thing that I learned when I started to work with Resolve. Very powerful tool, very logical. So I'm going to cut the two shots in half, mark in, I, O, out, big delete lifts it, Command Z undo. If I want to have small delete, takes it out. Nice. So with that being out of the way, switching over to the color, there are two different ways of, you can actually click on the icon that gives you the color environment, or we call it the color workspace. Or if you're a keyboard shortcutter, Shift 6 would be the one that I need for the color. And in the color, the first thing that you will need to define is how much real estate do you need. In the upper left hand corner, I'll try to clean up everything, and I only end up with one monitor, which actually represents what you are going to be working with. The timeline is represented by the first frame of each of the clips that are in the story. So if I go all the way to the beginning, which is the up arrow, I can actually see the first frame and my playhead. If I move that, meaning the playhead, I'm jumping from frame to frame, first shot, first frame, second shot, first frame, third shot, first frame, and so on. If the real estate is needed, I'm referring to the real estate that is below the program viewer. In the upper right hand corner of the interface, there is a clips window. We can turn it off, so now you have more real estate. So here is what you are looking at. You're looking at an image that is, in this case, the first shot of the story, and you will need to identify, are you in need of any adjustment? Generally, in color grading, we start with setting up the dark level and the bright level. You're starting off by setting the darkest point of the image and the lightest point in the image. There's a couple of ways of dealing with it. The first thing is I need to see what I'm looking at. So let's switch from edit into color. The color interface, generally when you have a new starting project or you're a new user, I always recommend that every workspace that you start with, reset it to the UI layout. So you reset it to default. That's going to help you a lot because a lot of things will be much cleaner. Here's what I'm referring to. If I want to see the measurement tool for this image that I'm parked on, right-clicking on it, the scopes come up and show me all four of the scopes available. and that may not be the case if you have it set up differently. What my interest is, how do I move from shot to shot? I am pointing to the first clip, second clip, third clip, and the highlight color identifies that I'm looking at a specific shot. As well, the program viewer shows that shot in the program viewer. So how do you move from shot to shot? Command Option K, go back to your keyboard commands. The up arrow moves to the left, the down arrow moves to the right. Actually, the up arrow moves to the left, the down arrow moves to the right, and every time you move, you actually park on the first frame of a shot. So if I move down, first frame of 2, first frame of 3, first frame of 4, and so on. So that's logical. Home gets you to the first frame and gets you to the last frame. That's all something that you as non-linear editors know by now. So let's go to the first frame. And if the real estate that is important for me, which in this case is the program viewer, I need to get rid of these buttons that are representing the thumbnails, and they are using up RAM, plus they are real estate management-wise cluttering my space. Upper right-hand corner, turn it off, so now I have more space to work with. And now comes the big question. What is the brightness and darkness setting for this shot? Two different approaches. One approach is you always use the first frame. The second approach is you move your playhead around and find a area where the brightest is brightest and the darkest is darkest. Let me explain that. So if I right click on the program viewer, the show scopes drop down shows me, and it gives me at this point either 4, 2, or 1 scope. Let's start with the 4. The parade is going to be discussed in some other YouTube videos or some webinars. The waveform and the vector scope are the most common, so I'm going to tone it down to 2. Parade is going to be replaced by the waveform, and the waveform is going to be replaced by the vector scope. The waveform is the brightness, and the vector scope is the amount of color. There are multiple adjustment possibilities. One of them is going to be adjusting that the brightness of the waves as well as the graticule, the lines, are also showing up. And in this case, I'm going to use the brightness element, not the color reading of the temperature. The vector scope the same way. I will make an adjustment so it will be very tight. There's one thing that I need to point out. If you're working in television and you have a lot of talking heads, the skin tone indicator used to be used, which is about 10:30, 11 o'clock. That was in earlier television, especially when the color was introduced. That was a big thing. But now the dynamics are different. It is not just one type of skin tone that we're looking for, and they are actually turning it off. So I just don't use that. Anyways, on that, when you're done, close the window. So now let's measure the brightness. The brightness seems to be going to a certain level. And if I move around, you can see how it changes. At the beginning, the brightest element seems to be in the upper right-hand corner, which is probably the reflection of that stainless steel or whatever metal is. And somewhere in the middle, I come up with this bright peeking out, and that's that bottom area. That's the brightest area. Now you notice the numbers are showing from 0 to 1023. The reason why we're showing from 0 to 1023 is because we are dealing with the 10-bit color environment. And that also brings up the question, when you want to pick the color with your eyedropper, do you use the 8-bit or 10-bit? Let's get used to right away the 10-bit. So when you right click in the program viewer, there is a option to show the picker for the RGB value. And the RGB value doesn't really show up unless I click inside and start to move around with the qualifier. And the qualifier for me seems to be giving numbers that are not really the 10-bit, 248. That's something that I'm familiar with in 8-bit. Therefore, in the viewing area drop down, I will show the RGB picker in 10-bit from now on. So when I say to you that the 0 is the darkest and the 1023 is the brightest, now it makes sense. So if I look at the white level, that white level is 900 something, and the darkest would be around 47. That's actually a nice clean black. With the tools that I just introduced to you, I need to just switch over to the vector scope. The vector scope shows you the amount of color. The amount of color in this case seems to be gravitating somewhere in the 9 to 12 quadrant, and pretty much that's where all the brown and yellowish is, because yellow and red creates brown. If I want to have the scope bigger, bring it up, and now it's much more easier to see. And this is where real estate management comes in. While I'm here, why don't I show you what happens with the vector scope and the waveform when I bring the saturation down. Bottom left-hand corner, there's a saturation tool. If I bring it down, there we go. Saturation shows me that the brightness didn't change, but there's no color. So that goes back to the basic rule of physics. You do not see color, you see the light reflecting of the color, or the light bouncing of the color. There we go. So in dark, that's why there's less color information, and in light there is much more. With that, let's reset it and let's dig into the color grading as a concept. Doesn't matter what shot you pick, you generally want to balance it off right away. The balancing starts with showing up a scope, and on the scope you define what is the brightest and what is the darkest element of the signal. So if you want to bring it to the brightest signal, clearly it's going to be above 1000, and if you want to do the dark areas, it's going to be in the 0. Now, when I say 1000 and 0, I'm referring to the full range. And this is where the big question of, are you working with broadcast material or something that is not necessarily broadcastable? So in that case, you open up and say to the computer, please show me the reference levels. The reference levels in 8-bit would be 16, 235, so multiplied 4 times would be 64 and 940. And when those numbers come up, you should see them as white lines telling you that that is the white line maximum that you should have in safe brightness area in broadcast. As well, there is a line below that. So if you want to make the adjustment, the question is, how do you do that? The fastest and easiest way to do that, guys, is always the curves. So the curves come down, they bring everything down. Grab a curve, and you grab not just the brightness, but all the elements with it, meaning the red, green, and blue. So you bring it down. If you want to be very, very specific, you can actually have a knee set up, and the knee brings up only the bright and doesn't affect anything below that junction point, which we call the anchor point. If I want to bring up the dark, I bring up the dark, or I can leave the dark alone. And this is the famous S curve that you probably guys heard about. Now, if you look at my setting, I'm actually in violation of the dark areas. The dark area is not where it needs to be. There we go. The line I'm referring to is this line that I should not go below if I want to be within compliance. For that reason, I will follow that guidance, and I will prep my material so it is broadcastable on any of the major networks or any of the cables that are broadcasting. How do you check it? Go to this, there we go, something maybe here at this junction point, bring it down a bit more. And that pretty much should be the way to go about it. Somebody above your pay grade may say, well, the mid-range is missing. Sure, push it up a bit. There we go. So now you have kind of a nice scenario. Check it what you did. Oh, the node actually contains all that information, so you can turn it off, turn it on. The cool thing about color grading in DaVinci Resolve is it always plays the clip that you're on. So if you play it full screen, which is Command F, hit the space bar, it plays that shot. Now, while I'm playing the shot, I can have a quick keyboard shortcut so I can turn it off and on while I'm playing it. If I made any changes, the changes are visible without, with. So if I want to compare the original with the one that I made adjustments to, manually turn it on, turn it off. In the scenario that I showed you, I am sticking with one node. The one node generally is not a safe way of separating elements. So I would probably think that it's a better choice if you just click on it, reset the node label, and add at least 2 serial nodes. The serial nodes are option S, once, twice. The first usually is setting up the brightness. The second one is setting up the color. So you can name it right away while you are doing this. So you can actually call the node label. Let's say call it B and W. And the second one is going to be the color. Now, the brightness adjustment is very, very logical. You use your curves, and the curves respond, and you can see what the response is with the brightness. I see people making adjustments of the curve by either manually adding the anchor points, or if you want to be specific, right click on the one that I added, Going to the right side past the custom button, there's a 3-button drop down, and add default anchors 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left and to the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can actually adjust only one section of the brightness or another section of the darkness. And as I said, if you have the measurement tool, the scope will tell you that. Single scope is the best way to start with because that's where you can see each element separately. The element I'm looking for is the waveform. The real estate that I am now still dealing with is going to be turned again off. There we go. So if I look at the brightness, I can see that a mid area is brightening up, and I don't have much of that. I see a lower area is brightening up because I have a lot of it, but you see the anchors before and after are limiting my environment. Therefore, if I reset everything, which in this case is right click on it, or there is a turn everything to normal, I can globally say, hey, everything in that upper area is going to go up brighter. Or, as we have seen it earlier, set up the S-curve, and now we have a nice contrasting environment. So now we check and see if we're happy with it. If we're happy, leave it. If it's not, spend time with it. This is where the color theory comes in very easily. If you understand that you can push the red and everything becomes redder, maybe just too much of the red. If I counter it with less blue, watch how I make it warmer. The best way to see color is always going to be starting with the vector scope. In the vector scope, you can notice that the density, first of all, and the graticule shows me that I am going into the 10 o'clock area in the quadrant 9 to 12, because that's what gives me the brown. If, on the other hand, I pull off the red and push the blue, I'm cooling it off. And that's generally the first game you're going to really have some fun with. So if I want to reset the color, right click. If I want to get the color off, I just reset the node. Now, there are multiple ways of dealing with the color. One of them, obviously, was this curves. How about the wheels? The wheels are unique. They actually separate the darker area, which is called the lift, from the gray area, which is called the gamma, and from the gain, which is the bright area. So you can brighten up the bright, which is the gain. Everything gets brighter. So the colors in that bright area are brighter. You can also brighten up the gray areas, and the colors that are in the gray area are brighter. And the colors that are in the dark area are going to be brighter. So the color adjustment is done either with the brightness or the amount of color. So if you want to have in the gray areas more red, push the red in the gray areas. Or take the red off in the gray areas. If you want to have the bright areas increasing the red, you push that into 11 o'clock and into 4 o'clock if you do opposite. These are all cool things, and that's where you start to think about what the color is. But let me just show you two additional tools that hopefully you will like, and you're going to start to think about them when you think about the darkness and brightness. To me, this is the most important. Set up the brightness and darkness. So let's go back to the first node. So whatever I did with the first node, it's probably acceptable. And if it's acceptable, I'll double check and see if the waveform does say, yeah, it's okay, but maybe I need to have some more material. Like what? Well, maybe brighten up more the mid, but that's just playing around with things. This is where things become interesting. Please go back. Please watch this. Go back into the upper right hand corner, and because I saved a certain look, there are two different schools of thought. One school of thought says right click and grab a still, so I have that look already saved. So that's the look I'm saving. The other school is much more sophisticated. I know that I have a color effect applied because I see the little rainbow colors around the number. So if I right click on the clip all the way up, there is a version 1 that is identifying that I made some changes. But if I open up a new version and create new version, I'll call it version 2. That second version is going to be the cold look. So in the cold look, I can say, well, I'm going to change things, but I haven't really decided what the cold look is. Is it going to be darker? Yeah. So let's reset the original setting. And you and I will now say hello to our new friends, the setting up the dark level, which is the dark level setup, and setting up the bright level, and setting up the bright level, and the bright level is set up. So I told the computer now to identify what the brightest and what the darkest is. Let's reset that to explain more this, because this is to me so powerful It's amazing that people are not using it more frequently. So if I define that the darkest is not going to be the darkest, but it's going to be a lighter color. So now I darkened everything. So it's a lighter color that is becoming darker. That's what I just told the computer. If I define that brightest color is not going to be a bright color, but the dark color, watch what happens. The same happens. It becomes very, very bright. I can still go back and tell the darkest to be the darkest. That's going to be okay, but the color is different. Let's save that as a second look. Right click, that's version 2. Open up a version 3. Reset everything. In this case, I will follow the guideline of the darkest being the darkest. I will follow the guideline of the brightest being the brightest. And now that's a different look. That's 3. On occasion, you will need to zoom in. When I say zoom in, you need to zoom in to an element to find something, and I use the mouse roller to do that for me. Generally, you want to be fit, the window. And now let's go into another option that I like a lot. This option is so powerful, I don't know why people don't use it more frequently. So watch this one. I park somewhere in the middle of the shot, find out what the balance of the brightness and darkness is, somewhere probably here, and tell the computer to do auto balance. The auto doesn't do too much. It just pushes up the brightest to the maximum brightest and pulls up the darkest to the deepest dark. And if I save that, and I have that saved as a version 3, let's find out what the version 1 was. The version 1 was, that was version 1. Load up version 2 was different, right? And version 3 is here. So I have 3 different versions that I created. The problem that you will face and I'm facing right now, I can't see them at the same time. How do I go about it? So in the clip, if I want to show up 2, load it. I can save that with the grab still, so it grabs that blue look. And then I can go to the third one, open up the third version, load up version 3. And now 3 images are visible physically in that gallery. But that to me is still not enough. How about if I ask the computer, click in the center and split the screen and show me the versions. Versions and the original, that's the coolest thing. And this can be seen in a full screen and it plays real time. Now, obviously this is a very detailed explanation how the color choices can be seen or how fast you can make this adjustment. My point is that the color grading starts with setting up the brightest level and the darkest level. And there are, as I told you, at least 3 different ways of doing it. Curves is one family. The second family is the crosshair and the automatic. So when I'm done with the color grading, there are a couple of additional things. Well, the color grading is not done. I'm done with the brightness and darkness. Let's talk about the color. Let's get the split screen off. There is a bicyclist that is coming toward us, and the bicyclist is moving at a specific speed. What I would like to do, I would like to separate him from the background. In version 17, this is something new, and it's so powerful. If you haven't seen it before, hold on to your chairs. I open up 1, 2 of those nodes. The first node I'm going to automatically set up, and I don't even need to look at what my brightness, because I kind of believe it's not bright enough. Show me the scopes. Okay, the scope shows up, and I notice that, yeah, I have some brightness and darkness, but it is not really where I need to be. Therefore, when I tell it automatically, it will bring up the brightness and darkness, and I'm okay to start with that. Let's accept that the bicyclist is steadily coming toward us, and somewhere at the beginning, you and I will open up the third node and tell the third node to do something magical, and it is called Magic Mask. There is a plus button, and the plus button allows me to select a section of that person. Tracking is asking, am I tracking a person or features of a person? So if I'm looking at specifics of the person, I can pick it up. I'm going to use a person. And let's see if the computer recognized this bicyclist as a person. Hit the tracker. Anything that needs to be tracked or analyzed really is helped by fast RAM, lots of processing power, and a powerful graphic card. The blanket shows us that he was pretty much separated from everybody. And in order for me to make adjustments to this selected area, I can make it have him brightened up, or made him darker, or maybe a different color. In this case, I'm just going to play him back as a brighter person. And if you look at the full screen, The separation obviously is not perfect, but for a $300 software, this is very powerful. Moving along, let's look at a shot where you and I can identify something that in color we like a lot, and this is one of those scenarios. The scenery is very specific, and the camera pans from left to right. There's going to be an element of a bicyclist coming by, and this is what my intentions are. And the production team says, well, make it brighter first and make it a different season. So it's not green, it's going to be something different. Option S, another node. The first one, I'm going to use the same principle. That is an easy way to brighten things up. The second option is going to be dealing with the color. Instead of messing up the color and adding more green, which generally is putting a green print on everything else, I would not deal with the green with the specific full page. I will do identifiable elements. So this is where I'm going to zoom in a bit and watch with my eyedropper. Pick a specific color with the qualifier tool. So I'm going to pick a specific green, and that specific green is going to be the dark greens. And the dark greens are going to show up. If you don't see them because you don't have the window, you can see them. So now you're going to see that I picked up some of those dark greens. Which ones, I don't know. But if I look at the white, I pick more of them in the qualifier, and I also move the center so I can actually define which section of the green is being picked up. Now, the cool thing here is that when I'm picking up those greens, I can define that those greens should be a different color. Like what? Heather, because maybe that's the season of the year. So if I pick red and blue and push red and blue, I will come up with purple. Might be much easier, just go into the color wheels and push the gain a little bit more purplish, or push the gain more greenish, which is silly, but you understand what I'm doing. So if I put some of that purplish in there, maybe I need to do the mid-range gray. Mid-range gray, there we go. Maybe it's better. It's much more believable. The question is always the believability. Because you can make anything you want, but if it's not believable, it's going to be unrealistic. So here's what I got. With the adjustment, without the adjustment, with the adjustment, without the adjustment. So if I play it, I should see some kind of a header color, purplish color on the green leaves. If I want to be much more, I can actually push the bright areas, and there we go. So now we have that. If I play it back on full screen, which in this case would be going back into the edit, bring the media pool up, close the scopes, full screen, Command F, there we go. You will probably agree with me that it's very noisy. So the purples are kind of twinkling. Yeah, I can clean it up. It's a whole bunch of tools. Like what? Go into the color, and you can remove the noise by temporal noise reduction. So this is where you can actually deal with that. We don't really have that much time to finish up in this short webinar all the tools that are available. It's an ongoing process, learning color, but what I'd like to do is, right now, when I'm done with this, the question is, how do you monetize it? How do you distribute it? The easy way to get things done is, can I have all the clips the same color? Let's start with that question. So whatever I have, I'm going to delete, go back to the original entire story, whatever the shots are. Let's go back to the clips, and whatever I had on each or any of those clips, select them all and tell the computer in the color to reset everything, all grades to, there we go, delete them. And now I would like to brighten up the entire show, and the entire show is going to be warmed up. Presumption is obviously that all the clips are of the same value. So here's how I can do that very, very efficiently. I switch from my clip view to the timeline view. In the timeline view, Option S adds a node, and that node will make adjustments to everything that is below it. It's almost like an adjustment filter, and that is the way you should think about it. So I'm going to make everything brighter. I'm going to bring it down, and because I would like to show you a major difference, I'm going to saturate everything, like very saturated. You will notice that the clips by themselves are saturated, but in the little icon they are not. So in timeline, we can actually check and see that each of the clips that I am pointing at, they don't have that saturation. Maybe the saturation is not really drastic enough. So I'm going to go to a shot. Well, I'm going to show you what happens if I desaturate it. So if I make it black and white, I'm expecting that each of these clips will be black and white. Well, they actually do show up black and white because the filter shows me. But look at the image inside the box. It's still green. It's still brown in the clip. Oh, so how is that possible? It's because the filter is not added onto a track above. The filter is added in the color tool. You see the discrepancy between the color in the upper right hand monitor as opposed to the timeline. In the timeline, the colors are still, you see the brown colors, facial colors. So the question is, how do you turn it off? You have to go into the color and turn it off, go into the timeline, activate that, and either turn it off or get rid of it. If you're coming from the family of Adobe Premiere, this is how it is done in the Edit tool. If you are in the Edit tool, you say hello to your effects library, and there is a adjustment tool called Adjustment Clip. It's the equivalent of the adjustment layer that you're familiar with in Premiere. In that adjustment clip, you can add the adjustment clip. Clearly, it has to be longer, and there's multiple ways of making it longer. In my case, I will zoom into the timeline and drag it out a bit manually, or copy, duplicate. In my case, it's going to be much easier if I just drag it out all the way to the end. And you notice it snaps to the end because the magnet is on. So now that layer, I will make an adjustment on that in color. That layer gets the adjustment. You notice that it is the second layer, not the clip below that, but the adjustment layer. And I'm going to make it very bright, just ridiculously bright. And I'm going to also make it very warm and ridiculously warm. And the blue is going to be taken away. So it's going to look like very, very warm. There we go. Too much yellow. You notice that I applied it to a clip. Okay, the clip is applied, but how about if I go back and edit? Is everybody adjusted? Yes, it is. The clip is adjusting everybody, meaning the adjustment clip. If I turn it off, you don't have it. If it's easier for you to understand this hierarchy because you have a layer 1 and layer 2 filter, adjust it or turn it off. If you don't have that, remember, we go back into the color. In the color, whatever we had, doesn't really matter. Go into the timeline view. In the timeline view, add a node. That node is going to make everything not just bright, but really, really, really contrasty. There we go. Very contrasty. And I'm going to saturate a bit, or not at all, or make it somewhere in between. Wash it out a little bit. If I want to type in a number, let's say 25. Look at it, the full screen. The entire show looks like that. I'm going to fast forward it, play it faster. So if you're done with the color grading, the next step would obviously to deliver it. I will just quickly go back to the edit because I don't want to waste too much time. I'm going to cut the story down very drastically to short elements. The fastest way to cut a story down is the keyboard shortcut that is essentially the same as top and tail on Avid as well as on Premiere. Can I do it live? Yeah, I can do it live, cutting it off. And I'm cutting it down to like segments, just a couple of seconds each. So the story length is really adjusted. This is just a fast way of doing editing. So if you are an editor, that's going to be something that will help you, I hope. So when I'm done with the editing, I can go back to the color and make the additional adjustment. The additional adjustment for me is going to be adding a specific color to it. So I'm going to add a specific color look to it. And that color look is going to be really a sepia tone. Some people pronounce it sepia tone. Lots of red and yellow combination. You can obviously desaturate a little bit so they can make it much more closer to that old look. And if that's what you like, just run through it. And in deliver page, which is Shift 8, pick custom or YouTube or whatever you think you need. In this case, I'm going to pick the custom. I'm going to have it MPEG-4, 264 codec. Add it to the render queue. It should be very fast. Click on it, render all. And when it's done, Where did I put it? I put it on a desktop. Command H. Let's see if it's on a desktop. Double clicking on it opens it up, and there is the story. I'll play it out, a couple of seconds of it.
Ready, action.
So this is how fast you can bring stuff into the Resolve. This is how fast you can do some editing. And this is how fast you can not master, but cover the basics of color grading using the curves, using the wheels, using the crosshair for the dark and the bright, automatic, and then when you're ready, hit deliver. So I hope that in this webinar you got a quick understanding of how material is linked, chopped together, altered, and then set for deliver. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for joining us. Good luck and keep on doing things, and welcome to the family of DaVinci Resolve users.